We are back.
Yeah.
That's a veiled movie reference there that I shouldn't do, but we're back. It is Friday. It is November 10th, and coming up is...
You know, you're a great actor.
I am.
I don't know why you didn't go into that profession.
I've been acting all my life, acting as a pastor all of my life, and most people aren't buying it.
And then what your mom used to...
Yeah.
Remember that? Don't you act out.
Yeah, don't you act out like that.
Yeah, come on.
So it is Friday, and we're a little giddy, and we're headed towards Sunday, November 12th, where we will be talking about stewardship at Huntersville United Methodist Church. I think you're going to continue the conversation on stewardship at Denver United Methodist Church. And as we continue to kind of process along our understanding of the theology of stewardship, Steve, you've got a word for us from 2 Samuel today.
So, here we go. 2 Samuel 24. I'm going to start with verse... this story starts in 18. So, 24:18 of 2 Samuel. On that day, Gad went to David and said to him, "Go up and build an altar to the Lord on the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite." So David went up, as the Lord had commanded through Gad. When Araunah looked and saw the king and his men coming toward him, he went out and bowed down before the king with his face to the ground. Araunah said, "Why has my lord king come to his servant?" In other words, Araunah's worried. Right?
Ruh-roh.
And David said, "To buy your threshing floor." David answered him, "So I can build an altar to the Lord, that the plague of the people may be stopped." So David has been told to go to this place, buy this threshing floor, build an altar to God. And then Araunah said to David, "Let my lord the king take whatever pleases him and offer it up. Here are oxen for the burnt offering, and here are threshing sledges and ox yokes for the wood. O king, Araunah gives all of this to the king." Araunah also said to him, "May the Lord your God accept you." So David is been asked to build an altar. He goes to buy and build the altar, and Araunah says, "No, I'll give it all to you." In other words, you know, you don't have to spare a dime, king. I'm going to give it to you.
I got you here, buddy.
But the king, this being David, replied to Araunah, "No, I insist on paying for it. For I will not sacrifice to the Lord my God burnt offerings that cost me nothing." It's an interesting story. There's a lot of complexity in this when you dig into it. But one of the big lessons out of this is David will not give to God that which doesn't cost him anything. In other words, it's not I'm not giving something. This idea of sacrifice is important. And we don't sacrifice goats or chickens or cattle or oxen, but this idea of giving in a way that is a sacrifice is something that runs through the Bible.
The principle is entirely biblical. When we go back to the law, when the Leviticus and the law was established, it was established that when you brought something to God as an offering, it was to be unblemished. It was not to be the least of what you had, the little scrawny calf at the end that you wanted to get rid of anyway. It was to be the best thing that you had, the best goat, the best sheep, the best cow. And I think that establishes this theological narrative, this theological understanding that God does not look for what is at the bottom of our checkbook, when something's left over at the end of the month. I think God is inspiring us to say, bring your best.
And why is that? Well, I think it's one of the driving principles behind it is to put ourselves in a position where we have to trust God and not ourselves. That idea, don't lean into your own understanding, trust in God. And that's a scriptural theme that runs throughout too. Trust me, trust me, trust me, trust me. And if you're giving from the least, then you're saying, "Oh, I don't need that." But if you're giving from the best, it's like, "Ooh, I really need this." And I know, for instance, for me, I grew up in a family, principally my mom, who made sure that our family always gave back to God. And there were times in my family where we struggled financially. My dad was a small business owner, and when he was transitioning to being full-time, self-employed, there were some lean times, and there were things I wanted as a kid, especially in middle school. You want the right clothes, you want the right shoes, you want the right everything, because it's status and it's popularity and all of that. And we didn't have that, and it was hard. At least I felt like it was hard. And I remember one Sunday glancing at the check she wrote to put into the offering plate, and it astounded me how much money my mom was giving to the church. And my thinking was, Mom, why are you giving that money to the church whenever we could have I could have that cool pair of shoes and that cool pair of blue jeans. I could move from the Wranglers to Levi's. What are you doing? And that was my thought as a middle school kid. But my mom trusted God to take care of our family, and it was her way of being faithful and demonstrating her trust back to God. She didn't mean for me to see the check.
It wasn't in your business. But
no, it wasn't in my business, but it was and I've thought about that a lot through the years. And as I've saw her example of giving, and then as a pastor, I've always believed that I can't ask people to do something I'm not willing to do myself.
That's right.
So
I think about my parents. My dad worked in the same textile mill from the age of 16 till he retired at 62. 46 years he worked in a textile mill. I went from probably sweeping the floor all the way up to a management position, but still never earned much more. He once told me more than the low 30s, low $30,000. And yet my dad, my mom, my stepdad, Tom, my stepmom now, Clarice, all are examples for me of faithful giving. None of them earned, exorbitant amounts of money, but I always know and always knew and still know today that this is an example for me of faithful stewardship.
Well, and here's what happens. I think, and this is from my experience, talking to lots of other people about this. When you give back to God, you have to get your priorities straight. Mm-hmm. And you have to be disciplined in your financial life. I've always told people, if you give 10% back to God, you're going to have 10% less to live on. Mm. But that's probably a really good thing, because what I've found is that it even as a younger person, it pushed me to develop a budget. It pushed me to say, okay, if I'm going to make this the priority, if I'm going to set aside this back to give to God, then I've got to make sure I keep an eye on where all the other money goes. Otherwise, I can't do it. But it creates a discipline within the budget. It creates an understanding of what really matters. And that, in the long run, creates more financial viability, because it's about budgeting, it's about taking care of, it's about stewarding. So when you steward money back to God, you begin to steward how you spend money in other places. And most of us, if we get honest with ourselves, have places in our personal finances where we can address how we spend.
It was brought home to me one time at the church I served at Mills River. There was a Mr. Bellamy who he taught me a lesson. He taught the whole church a lesson. He lined up 10 apples on the altar, 10 really nice, beautiful, juicy-looking apples. And he took 9 of them and said, okay, you get to keep these 9. And then he took that last apple, the 10th apple, that was supposed to be given to God. And he took a bite out of it and said, this is how we often do. He said, well, I can't quite offer the 10%, so let me take this bite. Well, then something else comes up, so he takes another bite. And then he takes another bite. And by the time he got through, the apple was nothing much more than a core. And it was a beautiful lesson for me and all of us about how we go about planning what we offer to God. It's one of those things that, okay, we get to keep the 9 apples, and those are a part of our gift from God. But that 10th apple we have to really guard. We have to really, otherwise we will keep eating into that 10% that is God's.
And I would say to those 10%, yeah, it's a high bar. It's a big deal.
And it is just a guide. If we'll get to John Wesley next week. And we'll talk about what Mr. Wesley said about giving. He didn't let us off at 10%.
No, but what I would encourage you to say, if you're sitting there looking at your financial situation, you're like, there's just no way. I would say, well, just begin giving. Just begin, because so many folks who are parts of churches just may not even give anything. Let begin and then see what happens.
But if we do not begin to plan, then it will never happen.
Right.
We are so grateful that you've given us this opportunity. We hope that, in spite of the difficult subject, that you'll come and hear from God's Word from both pastors at both churches on Sunday about this really important topic. It is a gift to us that you would even give us these few minutes, and we are indeed grateful.
Right. Thank you.
Have a good weekend. We'll hope to see you on Sunday at church.
Goodbye.